Hello, everybody, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Duncan Wold. I really appreciate you all coming over here. I know you have a lot of great presentations to choose from, so I appreciate you coming over here and hanging out with me a little bit while I talk about data and Eventbrite. I'm coming to you right now from Oakland, California. It's about 11:30 a.m. here, so good morning, also good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, wherever you're coming from. I would actually love hey, Rudy in the chat. People getting in the chat is awesome. Please, I hear it gets a little chaotic, so please feel free to get chaotic in the chat. Say hey in the chat if you want. Say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're coming from. I will try and follow along, although I'm sure I won't be able to totally, but I'm also told the chat is saved for me later. One bit of housekeeping. My fantastic, I guess he's a PA, Justin told me to make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, because as I mentioned, it does get chaotic. I will try to be following along and answer some questions. I will also have some time for questions at the end. And there's also a chance that someone else from PianoFight might show up too and answer some questions as well. So please get the questions flowing. All right, I got my iced coffee, I got my water, my shoes are off, I'm ready to go. So today we're going to talk about data. The title of my presentation is Use Your Data, aka How to Think Like a Stats Nerd. I do want to mention that the key word in there is like. It's not going to necessarily be about how to do complicated stats or anything like that. There's going to be some of that in there if you want to sink your teeth in a little bit. But really, it's about asking questions, and then it's about thinking about the data you have and how you might use that in order to answer some of those questions, especially big questions that are kind of sort of unanswerable. Oh, great, my slides work. So what's the goal of today? Well, we're going to get real. What do I mean by that? I mean that we're going to talk about real data analysis I've done. So not some theoretical stuff, but I'm going to actually look at 4 different case studies from the history of PianoFight and times where we've had a big question about our business, whether it be our event business, our bar restaurant business, the interaction of the two, and how we were able to take some of the data we had from Eventbrite and from other sources and use those to try to get some clarity and improve the way we run our business, improve the way we book shows, present shows. So let's get to the first question that, of course, everyone always has about PianoFight, the venue I work at. Where are the dueling pianos? This is usually what people say the first time they walk in, call us up on the phone. Unfortunately, there are no dueling pianos. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we're not a dueling pianos bar. We actually are a multi-stage venue with restaurants. So here's PianoFight by the numbers. It's a stats presentation, so we're gonna focus on the numbers. PianoFight opened in 2014. We have 3 rooms, 3 different performance rooms with a total capacity of 350 between the 3 of them. One room, the restaurant, is the first one you come into. It's got a stage for music, a cabaret style stage. We book bands there. In the back of the house, there are 2 black box theaters. One seats about 50, one seats about 100. We do all sorts of shows there. Total shows hosted since we opened and since the up until the beginning of the pandemic, 6,226. That is a lot of shows, and that translates to about 20 shows a week. So how does that work? I mentioned we got the 3 rooms. We try to book multiple shows a night in all the rooms. That it might be 1 or 2 total shows on a Monday, but on a Friday, Saturday, we'll probably have 5 or 6. And genres that we book, all of them. So obviously theater, plays, comedy, bands, but also dance, magic, drag, burlesque, film screenings. We're pretty much down for it. We even would book a dueling pianos if you wanted to book that with us. That would be fine. Here's a shot of the main stage theater. This is the 100-seat room. And here is a shot of the PianoFight bar where people hang out before and after the shows, meet the cast, talk to each other. Super fun. And then a little bit about me by the numbers, because why should you care about anything I'm saying? Maybe you shouldn't, but here's a little bit about me. 13 years in art marketing. By art marketing, I do mean largely event marketing. My current job title is Operations Director and Booking Manager at PianoFight. Some relevant experience, worked at indie record labels, worked at some media startups, did some analytics there, and was finally able to kind of join my love of performance arts, music, all things, and then also data and analytics at PianoFight. Culminating, of course, in the presentation that we have today. And my biggest pandemic accomplishment is that I got married. My now wife and I had a big 200-person wedding planned for last July. That ended up being a 2-person, 1 photographer, 1 cat wedding on Zoom, actually on Microsoft Teams, but that's another story. But it was rad, and I couldn't be happier. Okay, and then here's me. I play guitar. Also, you will notice the love of the bolo ties there. One bolo tie, two bolo ties. I also do sketch comedy. But let's get right into it. So, what is our challenge at PianoFight? Well, we have so many shows, and that presents, of course, a couple of challenges. I mean, it's a great thing, but one, at least from a data perspective, when we're actually looking at how the business works, it's often very difficult to untangle, how does one show contribute to the business? How does another one? One Friday night did great. Another Friday night didn't do so great. This one had 6 shows. This one had 5 shows. What was it? Was it one show? Was it some of the shows? Was it the aggregate? That's a hard thing to untangle when you're kind of looking at the data in an aggregate. And then, of course, having 20 shows a week, it makes it really hard to give real individual attention to those shows. So simply the velocity of shows through the calendar means that for the booking team, you can't see many of those shows. If you do get to see a show, you probably don't get to see it again the next month or whenever it comes back. And so how do you do quality control? How do you, kind of just know how things are going? You do your best to see as many as you can. Data can never really replace that, but it can help you. And I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. So that's our challenge. What is our opportunity here? Well, we have so many shows, which means, of course, that we have an absolute boatload of data to sort through and sift through and learn from. So before I do get into the case studies I wanted to talk about today, I just want to talk a little bit about event reporting in Eventbrite. Actually, if people are in the chat, throw in real quick, kind of 1 to 10, how comfortable you are with Eventbrite data. So 1 being like, I don't know what it is or where it is or how I got here, and 10 being like, I'm a master and I also don't know why I'm here, and then anything else in between. Be cool to get a little bit of a sense of kind of where people's comfort level are. But in case you've never done this, I would highly recommend checking out your event reports inside Eventbrite. You get here by going into your event manager, clicking into any individual event, and then along the left side here, you see dashboard, order options, et cetera, et cetera. Down here circled in red is the reports. There's some analytics and charts, which are also great to look at and have helpful things. Event reports is where I base a lot of my work on. That's really what lets you export all of your raw data that you have out, so you can slice it and dice it, maybe in Excel or Google Sheets or things like that. And a couple things just to highlight. You'll see these blue links under the attendee summary here. There's other types of summaries, but you can run a report for multiple events. So if you click show events here, you can select a few events or you can select all your events. For my workflow, I usually am just saying, give me everything. So all the events. And then under the columns, you can see all the types of data that are collected. So, the ticket price and how many tickets were sold and how many people were checked in and the address and custom questions, all those kinds of things. Usually I'm just saying, give me everything. I'll sort it out later. And also, for those of you who answered, 5, 6, 7 and above, and it's great to see these numbers here. It looks like we have everybody all over the map, which is awesome. I would also highly recommend checking out the API. And that is actually, to be perfectly honest, what I use to do most of my work. And is one of the reasons so many years ago, even, that we decided to go with Eventbrite, because they had this API that let us actually get the data out of the system, work with it programmatically. And even though everything I'm showing you today, there's a way to do it all by hand in a Google Sheets or in an Excel, having the flexibility to use some kind of a programming language, JavaScript, Python, something like that, to take it in, crunch it around, do different things with it, sort of makes it easier to work with, easier to do fancier things, easier to adjust later, possible sometimes to build little dashboards you can give to other people on the team who aren't so technically inclined to work with the data. So not going to get into that here, but would highly recommend it. And also, just going to mention this, I'm going to put my contact info up at the end. If you want to talk to me more about this stuff, I love talking nerdy data stuff. So please feel free to reach out. But let's get into it with case study number 1. And a big question that we asked relatively early in the life of our venue, will a higher price drive down ticket sales? Now, I also will just mention a little disclaimer, this stuff, the results here are not meant to be something that you should take and think, oh, this is going to be how all events run. This is how my events will run. I don't totally know how your events will run based on if you're a big festival or a venue and run a lot of events or small events or big events. I think these things can all be quite different. You'll learn a little bit about the interior of how the PianoFight event model works and business works. But I more really want to try to focus less on the results, as I mentioned, more on how do we ask questions and how do we use our data to think about getting some kinds of answers to those questions. Oftentimes partial answers, but some kind of insight. So we asked this question. Higher prices, is that going to drive down sales? So, we want to price our shows high. We want to make money. We want the artists to get paid. We also want lots of people through the door, so they're patronizing the bar and the restaurant. What happens if we push all our show prices up? Is that going to hurt our bar restaurant sales? Less people through the door, right? Good question. And as we kind of combed through it, we actually found the opposite. We found that there was a positive relationship between ticket prices and ticket sales. How did we do that? Well, we spat out all our data for the first year and a half or so, and we took a big accounting of every show, and we looked at, well, what's that show's average price? And then we looked at how many people attended that show, bought tickets to that show. We mapped that for probably the first 18 so months of our existence and got the following graph. And again, if you want to talk about how do you actually make graphs like this, maybe hit me up afterwards and we can talk about it. Don't want to get into the technical details of that, but just want to say that just by going in and looking at the event reports, spitting that data out, putting it into a Google Sheet, we were able to see that, well, actually, as ticket prices get higher, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and that's kind of the range of most of our shows, or maybe in the $5 to $30 range, the average attendance goes slightly up. So no, as we kind of push the show prices up, we wouldn't expect that would actually drive our attendance down. We might expect it would actually bring our attendance up. Why is that is another question. And we've done some other experiments to think a little more deeply about what that might mean. What I'll just say for my own sake is that the way I interpreted this was not specifically that higher prices necessarily drive more sales, although I think that's a reasonable thought. Perhaps your price is part of your marketing and someone sees a $5 improv show and thinks, maybe that's not so good. And they see a $20 improv show and they think, oh, that actually might be pretty good. My interpretation was more that this was one of those cases of correlation rather than causation, that you kind of have production teams that just sort of have their act together a little more. They're going to put on a better show. They're going to work their finances out a little more. They're going to be more confident and they're going to sell better. But in any case, it gave us a lot of confidence to go after higher price shows, to suggest to producers that they bump their prices up a little bit. We did do some experiments with shows that started at one price and moved upwards. Just to mention this, we also found that those didn't see as any decrease in sales as we noticed it. And so that, in year 2, 3 of our business, pushed a lot of people's prices up and pushed a lot of bottom lines up, which was a good thing. Next up, a case study on bar spending. So a question, do big ticket spenders also spend more at the bar? So I mentioned that our business is 1 part theater, entertainment, 1 part bar and restaurant. Hopefully they're playing together in the best of days. So one question is, what happens when you have these higher price shows? What effect does that have on the bar? If we do a bunch of $5, $10, $15 improv sketch comedy shows, and then another night we do $30 world premiere plays and higher production shows that are $25, $30, whatever, how does that affect the bar sales? You get the big spenders in, do they spend more at the bar? Now, this took a little bit more than just our Eventbrite data. We also had to go into our POS data. That's our point of sale system, which happens to be Square. And we went and looked night by night over the course of several years, averaged up all the tickets that were sold for a night and said, what was the average ticket price for this night? What was the average ticket price for the next night, the next night, the next night, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other end said, well, what was the average bar spend for that night? Added that up, put that in a big plot, ran a little analysis on it. What did we find? Actually, no, there wasn't really much of a conclusive relationship between your average ticket price and your average bar spend. And for those who are really interested, here's this crazy graph, which along the x-axis is basically showing you what was the average ticket price for all the shows that night, or all the tickets purchased that night. And on the y-axis, what was the average bar spend? you will notice there is a very slightly positive correlation, but small. I would say not enough to be conclusive. And really, if you look between the kind of space where we have the best data between about $10 and about $25, down on the one end, it's maybe around 14, and on the other end, it's maybe around 15. So it's a little bit, but really, you do cheap improv shows, you do expensive world premiere plays. At least in our business, those people don't have any real difference in terms of bar spend. So for the bar business, it's really just about getting people through the front door, at least from a first kind of order perspective. That was one thing we learned that was quite eye-opening, something we did not know on day one or in year one, something we found out in really year 2 or 3 once we had enough months, nights, shows under our belt to see that. Next up, show quality. Now, did that show sell out because it was a good show, or did it show out just because it had a clever title or a good marketing hook? So this is a question that we had at a certain point where, we would do, also just real quick, my co-presenter just showed up, so I just want to introduce him. Here's Bonk. He's the real mastermind behind all this stuff, so I want to give him all the credit. But we noticed, without naming names, there were some shows that the staff would see, the staff would review, say this show's a great show, and it actually makes a lot of sense. In fact, I'll call out one great magician who performs at PianoFight. Will be there again, David Gerard. One of the bartenders mentioned to me one point, said something like, it's a great show. We'd seen it as a great show. He's like, it's a great show because you meet someone at the bar who's seen it, and a month or two later, they're back. And not only are they back, but they brought 3 coworkers who didn't see the show before. And that was kind of like light bulb moment. So I thought, I wonder if we can go look at returning buyers for different shows. And I wonder if that'll tell us something about the quality of those shows. So we designed an experiment around that. We said we're going to kind of get some somewhat formal staff reviews of different recurring shows, especially ones that generally sell pretty well. And then we're going to look at this data. And so we pulled our Eventbrite data. We looked at email addresses that were purchasing. We looked at them over the course of 5, 6, 7 runs of a show, saw how often they recurred. And what did we find? Well, yes, we found that higher quality shows have more return ticket buyers, markedly more. And what do I mean by that? Well, taking the group of shows that the staff, through their subjective ratings, said, well, these are not such great shows in terms of the content of the show. Well, they had a returning rate around 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%. And then the shows that were higher quality shows, the staff said these are really great shows, they tended to have a returning rate of 15, 20, 25%. And that was really cool to see. Once again, I would never say that this is a substitute in our world for just seeing a show. It's always going to tell you a lot more than looking at this data. But when I talk about the challenge of the velocity of shows through the calendar, this is a tool that our booking staff, which is very small because, once again, we are an arts organization, so the budgets are tight, is able to use to do some high-level analysis of our calendar, look at kind of, do we think we have good shows? What do we think? Good shows, full houses. That's the motto at PianoFight. That's what we always want to do. And once again, not worrying so much about what percentage of shows have this thing, that thing, just focusing on what was a question we had. Can we use data to assess show quality? Yes. How can we think about that? Design an experiment, use our Eventbrite data, and get some clarity on it. Not absolute clarity maybe, but some really useful insights. All right. And then number 4, show timing. And this one is a little in the weeds, so follow me here. But the question we kind of asked was, what's the best time slot to maximize sales or to maximize audience spend on a show? And going into this, I'll tell you, we all thought, well, Fridays at 8, Saturdays at 8. There's your best time for a show. I mean, that's certainly where we would push a lot of our best shows. I think that's kind of conventional wisdom for the theater world. But we thought, well, let's look at if that's true. And so what we did was we built, again, using the API, using some light programming, a little matrix that would look at our calendar like little boxes, kind of like a Google Calendar, right? 7 to 8 p.m., 8 to 9 p.m., 9 to 10, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. and look at those boxes, look at all the shows that started between 7 and 8, between 8 and 9, between 9 and 10, etc., Monday through Friday, and look at how they sold. And this took a little bit of a second step, because first we just looked at how many sales, what the sales looked like for each of those slots over the course of a year or over the course of several years. And when we did that, we found that yes, Fridays, Saturdays get most sales. But then we said, well, we know that Fridays and Saturdays also get booked the most and that we push a lot of shows there. So what if we actually look not at just the total sales by the time slot, but we look at the sales by shows in that time slot, meaning that maybe Wednesdays at 8 gets booked every other week. Fridays at 8 gets booked every week. So of course there's going to be more sales on Fridays at 8 than Wednesdays at 8. But what if you only look at the nights where shows were actually booked? And we found something kind of interesting. We actually found far less of a relationship than we would have expected between these slots we would have thought of as like the best slots in the calendar and how sales went. This is, I admit, not the clearest graph here. So again, just follow me. This is from like our first year and a half of being open, but on the left, you have your average gross sales by day and time. So how much money is each time slot generating over the course of a year? And you'll see that, yes, Tuesdays at 7, Wednesdays at 8, Thursdays at 8, Fridays at 8, or it's Wednesdays at 7, Thursdays at 8, Fridays at 8, Saturdays at 8. Those are generating the most sales. Those are generating the most money. But on the right, when we actually look at only the times shows were actually booked in those slots, it's a much more smeared out picture, meaning that actually sometimes you have shows, 7, 9, that those are strong. 8, of course, is strong. And what was really the most interesting for us, especially given the way that the theaters work and that we book shows, is how strong some of those Friday night slots were. And you kind of see that little band of orange on Fridays that goes all the way from 7. 8 is, yes, a little more red, but 9, 10, and 11, those are all good. So we don't book as many shows Fridays at 9, Fridays at 10, Fridays at 11. At least we didn't in our first couple years. But when we book those shows, they do great. And so this gave us, again, from the booking team, a lot of confidence to go to the people who are using our space, renting our space, producing shows, and to say, hey, you got a great show. Friday at 10 is not booked. That's a great slot. Get in there and do it. And that worked really well. And just to kind of show you what happened. So I think this was for 2015. We started pushing people, throughout 2016. And then by 2017, you'll see that on the left, this kind of graph of how different slots did over the course of a year, much more happening at Fridays and Saturdays at 10. Still pretty smeared out on the right. And then just to kind of drive that point home, this is how our kind of booking calendar changed in terms of the actual revenue, different slots in our calendar we're generating between our first year and our third year, where on the left, we really had most of our revenue in that 8 o'clock slot. And on the right, we ended up really pushing a lot more shows into the later 10 o'clock slots, and they did great. So again, gave us a lot of confidence in talking to our renters, the shows we were producing, and helped a lot more like great shows happen, good shows, full houses. There were a lot more good shows and a lot more full houses after that. So those were my cool case studies from the history of PianoFight, our 5 or so years of existing, now 6, but of course the pandemic year doesn't count. And so what are some of these key takeaways that I have that I want you to take away from this? Well, one, your biggest challenge may very well be your biggest strength. So for us, we have so many shows, it's almost unmanageable to kind of sit down and think about them, but that turned out to be a great strength because it was also generating so much data for us that we were able to use and find these key insights about our business. I think when you're looking at your events business, as I said, you might have a totally different business. You might be a convention that happens once a year. So you don't have hundreds of events or thousands of events. You have 3 over the last 3 years. But I bet you have hundreds or thousands of orders or hundreds of thousands of booths in your space, and start thinking about something like that, where you might have 100 or a few hundred data points and think like, well, what might I learn about the way this works? What works well? What doesn't work well? 2 is it's good to talk about big ideas, but you always want to ask specific questions. So I say ask specific questions that get at big ideas. It's okay if the answers to those specific questions don't answer the entire big idea. In fact, they probably never will. And part of this is that you have to be okay with a little bit of uncertainty. You have to be okay with things being a little hard to pin down. Data is kind of always that way. But when you ask specific questions, you get the most useful results. And, these things all kind of nudge my beliefs in different directions. So maybe I come in thinking Friday and Saturday 8 are our best time slots. I do the data analysis. It nudges me to think, ooh, Fridays and Saturdays at 10 are actually quite good. Thursdays at 8 are better than I thought. It doesn't make me think, oh, Monday nights at 11 are killer. I'm not there yet. Maybe we'll figure that out someday. But it does just kind of nudge me more in that direction and kind of nudge the business more in that direction. And then number 3, always be excited to be proven wrong. So in these examples I showed, some of them came out the way I thought. I assumed better shows would have a higher return rate for audience. They did. But for many of them, I got results I didn't expect. I didn't expect that there wouldn't really be much of a result between how much people spent on tickets and how much they spent at the bar. Although in retrospect, that does kind of make sense. I didn't expect the time slot thing. So that's really exciting. And furthermore, if down the road we figure out more experiments, maybe those even undercut some of the things that I've talked about here today, I would be excited to be proven wrong again. I also wouldn't be shocked if our business changes over the next few years. I think coming out of the pandemic, we probably won't run the business the exact same way. And, that means that some of these results may not be useful anymore. And that'll be something we check out. Now, I don't want to end my portion of talking before I get to Q&A without talking a little bit about things on the other side of COVID. And so one thing I'd love to hear from you, if you want to throw some ideas in the chat. Bonk is getting some love. Hey, Bonk came back. He wanted to say hello. What are some trends that you are going to be watching post-COVID? I actually would love to hear in the chat from folks anything that you are going to be looking at, some assumptions you have about how things will change, some questions you have. Let me highlight a few from me. And I phrase these as questions. I probably should have phrased these as statements. So one, is our audience going to skew younger? The assumption I would have is yes, at least for a while. I think our audience is going to skew younger on the other side of the pandemic in terms of the average age. That, if it's true, is probably going to affect a little bit the composition of our calendar, and we'll be looking more for shows that appeal to that younger audience. But again, this is a thing we'll be watching and hopefully proving right or wrong in 4, 5, 6 months. And of course, if it is true in 6 months, maybe that's just because younger people are more excited to come back faster, and maybe the older demographics do come back too. Or maybe it's totally wrong. We'll find out. Number 2, I wrote, will music come back faster than other shows? Really, the question is, are we going to see a difference in different genres of shows? So theater, dance, comedy, music, magic, these have different audiences, different demographics, et cetera. Same kind of a question. Performers and audiences of one type, are they going to be more excited to come back sooner? Or are they going to be a little more cautious? My guess is yes. Once again, my guess is that music shows are going to come back a little faster. I know that this is based just somewhat on booking requests. We've seen a lot more booking requests for music coming in kind of sooner and more frequently. The theater requests, I would say, have started to pick up since some of these California announcements in the last few weeks about some of the openings up. But again, I would love to be proven wrong on this. And then number 3, are we going to see a new Roaring 20s? Maybe this is a little bit of wishful thinking. I bet a lot of people here have this wishful thinking though. But let's say, yes, I think so. We are going to get a new Roaring 20s. It's going to be awesome. And people are going to be coming out to shows in bigger numbers. And second to that is, I do think a lot of people know that arts have been hit hard. And so some of those questions about, the price and will people pay more for shows, I have a feeling that people are going to know that they need to support arts and artists on the other side of this. And that may be even more true. And, my experiments have only gone up to $30, but I would love to see some 35, 40, 45 shows and see how those do, because I have a feeling those might do well. And then just to see kind of some things that got thrown in the chat, going to be looking at the no-show rate for free events. That's a good question. Is it Susie? I think. Would love to know what you think is going to happen with that. No-show rates for our shows. I know for free tickets, both tickets to free shows and complimentary tickets to paid shows, we get about a 50% no-show rate. And for paid tickets, we get about a 10% no-show rate. From what I hear from other people, that's relatively standard. So what do you think? You think people are going to no-show more or less on the other side of this? They're going to sign up for more things and do less, or they're going to be more thoughtful and sign up for stuff and come out. I'll do a little thinking like a stats nerd on the fly. And I would say one, I don't know, which is also probably a good key takeaway to not always be sure. But if you really want to pin me down, I would guess that you get a little more frenzied kind of signing up for stuff, and then people are pulled in more different directions, and maybe that no-show rate goes slightly up. But let's watch and find out. And Susie, you think they're going to no-show more as well? That's great. So that's what I think. But who knows? Let's watch and let's find out. Okay, and then here's a shot from PianoFight from, I think this is from Short-Lived, our short play competition a couple years back. And thank you. That is the presentational portion of this show. As I mentioned, I'm going to get into the QA here in just a second, but let's stay in touch. Again, Duncan Wold, part of PianoFight, downtown San Francisco. Actually, very exciting. During the pandemic, we did something insane, took over another venue in Oakland. So on the other side of this, we'll be opening up a second venue. It's a one-stage venue with a 100-seat theater, but we're going to be doing a lot of stuff. Excited to hear from people in the area, excited to hear from people not in the area, people who just want to talk stats and nerd stuff, whatever, get at me. Duncan@pianofight.com is my email address. And also on Instagram, I am @GramWithMe. You can see more of Bonk. You can see some of the music that I do, other things. It's Instagram. You know how it works. So that's that. Thanks for coming to my presentation, everybody. I'll give a little hand. This hand is for all of you. Cool. So if you have some questions, and I saw some people throwing questions in the chat, but throw some of those questions in the Q&A. And we got about 10, 15 minutes for Q&A questions. So I'll just take a sip on the coffee while you think about that and toss them in. Woo. Okay, so let me jump in. So first question here from Susie. What kind of graph did you show us for the ticket price versus ticket sales? It wasn't a bar graph and wasn't a scatter graph either, question mark. Awesome, let's get detailed. So for the ticket price, so yes, I see where you're going with this. So it is actually a scatter graph, and I know it looks a little wonky. And the reason it looks a little wonky is that you have clustering on the x-axis around the prices of shows. So most shows are priced $10, $15, $20, $25. And so you see a ton of dots stacked up on top of each other at 10, 15, 20, 25. They look like bars, but they are indeed scatter. And then we, of course, have less shows at some of those funkier things, but there's a handful of shows that are probably at 12. There's a hand show that are at 13 to 14. There's a handful at 17, 18, 19. Looks like there's one show that got priced at $21 somewhere. Handful of shows at 22, 23. So that's what that is. It is a scatter graph. And I find scatter graphs, to me, are the most straightforward to kind of start thinking about stuff, because you just say, does this thing relate to this thing in any kind of discernible way? And in this case, we found that yes, discernibly, higher price shows get a slightly larger number of tickets sold. Again, the graph doesn't say any more than that. It doesn't say why. It doesn't say that one's causing the other or not. That's up to your brain to think about and do more experiments on and think what that's going to mean. But I think if you look at a few of these, you'll see that I do a lot of scatter charts. So same with this one, scatter chart, x-axis, what did people spend on the shows? Y-axis, what did they spend at the bar? Is the relationship? In this case, not really. This one, not a chart of any kind per se, really just a grouping of one type of show, a grouping of another type of show, and then an average. And then finally, the craziest one, this kind of heat map, I guess is what you'd call this, of days, times, and then actually this is exciting because this is like our 3-dimensional chart. There's three things going on here: day of week, time of night, and then the color, the heat from kind of blue to red, telling you audience spend. I love a good graph. People who are working with me will tell you I use a lot of scatter charts. Sweet. So that's the only question that I got so far. Let's jump back into the chat and see what's there. How do you determine your best ROI from advertisements that may cost? That is a fantastic question. And I, as someone who's got to be honest, I will tell you, I don't exactly know, because I find that to be one of the most vexing questions. And it's not for a lack of looking deeply into that. It's just because it's a challenging thing to do. And, we've done a lot of Facebook ads, we've done a lot of Google ads. People can probably all have their own thoughts on Google. I know, or on Facebook and Google. I know for myself, I look at the Google charts. We spend money. It tells me things. Sometimes it says you made, a 2.5 return on your investment. I don't always trust Facebook, and I do find some of the numbers they present to not be backed up by things I can really go down the rabbit hole and understand. So I question their validity. And I don't really have much to work with outside of that. I will mention that we did use, I forget the name of it. It's the company that Eventbrite bought to do advertisements, and they were showing us some great numbers. But me, I always want to look behind the curtain and understand more, because one thing they look at a lot is like they tag people who see an ad, and then they look at people who are buying tickets. But a lot of these advertising services, I say, it's great to know that this number of people who saw my ad bought my tickets, but how do I know that those people weren't going to have bought tickets anyway before they saw my ad? How do I know I'm not just hitting my friends and fans with these ads? So I don't know. You can tell I have a lot of trust issues with Facebook, but it's a great question. I spent a lot of time on it, and I still feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. Some other chat questions are here. Are our questions not showing up in the Q&A tab? I don't know. I only see 2. Oh, here's some more questions in the Q&A tab. Sorry, I just don't know I don't know what I'm doing. Let me go back. 5909, 5914. Okay, cool. So 1, how to start analyzing data when you don't have any experience, because you recommend a tool that could help us with that besides Eventbrite Analytics. Yeah, so I would say Excel or Google Sheets, any kind of a system like that. And I would recommend going into the back end of Eventbrite, clicking into an event, going to the event reports, clicking whatever it was. Let me go back to that slide. The option that lets you choose what event you're looking at or what events you're looking at, and select all of them. And then, well, it depends what you want to do. I always just get everything and then worry about it later, but I can also see where that might be a little bit daunting. So maybe just in terms of starting with something, maybe start with one show, spit the numbers out. It's going to give you a bunch of columns. And again, I think scatter charts are always great. So go Google up on scatter charts a little bit, look at how to do those in Excel or Google Sheets, and just start asking yourself, do I think the ticket price has something to do with the average attendance? Do I think the length of the show title has to do with how many people, my no-show rate, and work on that, and then get your data in Excel into 2 columns, column A, column B. A is going to be your ticket price, B is going to be your attendance rate or whatever, and then select those columns, make a scatter chart, and just look at the data. Get a trend line in there. This is all stuff if you kind of Google around scatter charts, trend lines, see how these things work. To me, that's the best way to just start to really look at some hard numbers and just see, does it go up? Does it go down? Does it go up a lot? Does it go down a lot? Is it this way? Is the data super tight around the line? Is it very fluffy around the line? That's all good stuff. Next question, will hybrid take over pay-per-view live stream and live audience? That is a great question. I assume that's kind of the things that are coming up. I think the big $1,000 question is exactly that. These live stream shows, are they here to stay? I don't have such a dog in that fight, but I know we're going to be trying it, and I know we're going to be looking at it. I guess if I had to just guess, I would guess that the live stream stuff stays around in some capacity, but largely goes away. I think it's going to need to find its own niche because there's a magic in being in a room with people that live stream does not replace. So what does live stream add? Maybe it gets some people from Australia watching your show in Oakland, California, that couldn't watch it otherwise, and that could be some magic. We'll see, but that's a great question. David, do you have any advice on processing data which is more qualitative? You mentioned that most of the data is no replacement for coming out to the shows, but is there a way to formalize that information? That is also a fantastic question. And absolutely, I mean, it helps the more comfortable you are with the fuzziness around all this stuff, because in the end, the really, the hard data you look at, it can be a little bit, it can give you a false sense of security, like you're looking at really specific stuff. We're not doing chemistry and physics here, where we are doing something more qualitative, even with some of the hard numbers. So I actually think a lot of the most interesting results come from some of that more qualitative analysis. And in terms of tips and tricks, you always have to trade off in terms of something that's useful and something that's easy to do. So, for us, good show, bad show, that's not a real number. That's not a real metric. But you kind of create a category, and you create some kind of a way to put things into that category. And you might have multiple ways to put that thing in a category, and different people are going to do it differently, and that's okay. So, for us, we said, what's a good show? What's a bad show? We say, well, let's get people we trust to see them and rate them. And that gave us a starting point to see if there was even worth going further down that road. Now, we haven't gone much further down that road, but I could see where we would. Maybe we'd start getting audience feedback after the shows and working that in. Maybe, maybe we could put an applause-o-meter inside the theater, measure the volume of the clapping, decibels per audience member. Maybe that'll help us out. I don't know. That sounds pretty cool. Sam, when have you seen sales conversion-wise from advertising? What has worked best in your case? FB ads, Google, YouTube, etc. So once again, let me just be quick on this, because we have put the vast majority of our ads into either Facebook ads or into like local ads, meaning like ads in a local paper or things like that. So I don't have a great sense of like Google, YouTube versus Facebook. So let me just kind of leave it at that. Facebook ads seemed, in the little bits of testing we did, to work a little better for us in the initial days, but I'm not totally sure. Sorry. David, do you have any advice? Oh, that's the qualitative one. Susie, are people more likely to pay for live experience or to access the recordings? Would love to know that. I think and hope and sort of pray that they're going to want to pay for the live experience, and then maybe they'll also want to access the live recordings later. But I think for us, live is the thing. That's the magic of being in the space. That's what we want to. That's what we are hoping is coming back. Dominica, will PianoFight be transitioning to include some more online events? I know there's one coming up because I RSVP'd for it. Great. Well, I'll see you there. I'll probably be behind the bar or trolling around. And again, I don't totally know. We have certainly seen some online events that have been very cool, that have allowed people to do something slightly different than they would do in real time. I'll plug one of our other partners here, gather.town. We use them. They're kind of like a little 8-bit video game meets a Zoom. So you're like on a Zoom with people, but you can run around a space. You can run away from people if you don't want to talk to them, which is fantastic. And they let you build little worlds. So we've built little offices for people and done events there. And that has a certain magic to it. That's a little different than what you get live. So I could see that being a piece of our future. And I could also see it going away. You skipped the following question. Sorry, Agatha. What have you seen sales conversion wise from advertising? Oh, I think I did do that because I went back to it. And then Sam, have you looked at timelines for ticket sales? Like more time to sell, the better it goes. That is a great question. There is a very exciting thing I could talk about that we have worked on that is related exactly to that, which is basically the curve of ticket sales that you see. I think Eventbrite always talks about the initial bump and then the valley of death and then the thing at the end. We work with a lot of indie artists. We don't work with a lot of big names. We don't often see a big bump at the beginning. We usually are just kind of a slow ramp up. And so, yes, we have looked at that. And we do use that sometimes to do some really cool predictive analysis. It gets better and better. The closer you get to a show, it's really hard to predict things, a month out. But looking at a Friday on a Tuesday, we can do a pretty good job of predicting where our ticket sales are going to be, which is great for bar staffing and things like that. Again, for us, it's like, we see 50% of the sales in the last few days for most shows, not all of them. but that's definitely true. And we also do see that the longer it's on sale, the better it does. But really, it's really just how strong it is in those last few days. I have a feeling I'm getting close to my time here. And yes, I got the 2-minute warning. And Justin's asking me to please naturally wrap up your presentation. And what's more natural than reading Justin's instructions to me? So sorry if I didn't get to your questions. I'm new to the system. I did my best. You got my email. So if I didn't answer your question, send me an email and let's chat. And from me and Bonk, who's sitting in the windowsill over there, have a wonderful rest of your day.